I was in the garage when my son called. Not my son, his fiancée. She introduced herself the way people do when they want you to know they're doing you a favor by talking to you at all. This is Serena, Owen's fiancée. Like I might have forgotten who she was. Like I hadn't sat across from her at 3 dinners and watched her eyes scan the room every time she thought no one was looking. I had grease on my hands. I was rebuilding the carburetor on my '68 Mustang, the one I've had since I was 24, the one my wife Eleanor used to call your other family. I almost didn't answer. I almost let it go to voicemail. I wish I had. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "I wanted to speak with you privately about the rehearsal dinner next Saturday." I set down the wrench. "All right, Owen and I have been going back and forth on this, and we both agree." She paused, and I heard the careful arrangement of words happening in real time, the way you can feel someone constructing a sentence they've practiced. "The rehearsal dinner is really for the wedding party and immediate family, close family, and we've decided to keep it very intimate. Just parents who are actively involved in the planning." I let that sit for a second, and I'm not one of those. "You've been very generous with your offer to contribute to the wedding costs," she said. "We're so grateful, but the dinner itself is going to be small, very curated." "Curated," she said, "curated about a dinner table." "I see," I said. "We just don't want any awkwardness, you understand?" I told her I understood. I told her to have a good evening. I set the phone on the workbench and stood there for a long time looking at the carburetor parts laid out on the cloth. I'd known something was wrong for months. Since before Owen put that ring on her finger, honestly. My son is a good man. I raised him to be. 41 years old, works in commercial real estate development, does well. But he's always wanted to be liked. He wanted it when he was 7 and he wanted it when he was 35. And somewhere along the way, Serena figured that out and made herself the person whose approval he needed most. Her parents are wealthy, not quietly wealthy, loudly wealthy the way some people are. Her father, Raymond, runs a private equity firm in Connecticut. Her mother, Claudette, sits on the boards of 3 nonprofits and talks about it constantly. They had come down to visit us in Virginia in February, and I had watched Raymond walk through my house with the kind of careful neutrality that rich people use when they're trying not to let on that they're disappointed. Owen had told them about the wedding contribution. I had offered to put in $300,000, a significant portion of the budget, not because I was trying to buy my way into anything, but because Owen is my only son, and I wanted to give him a wedding worth remembering. I'd been saving for years. Eleanor and I both had. She passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. And when I went through her things, I found an envelope in her bedside drawer with "For Owen's wedding" written on it in her handwriting. $4,800 in cash. She'd been tucking money away for years without telling me. I folded that envelope and put it in my coat pocket. I still have it. So when I offered to contribute to the wedding, it wasn't just my money, it was hers too. Serena and her parents didn't know what I did for a living. Owen had never exactly corrected their assumptions, and the assumptions had calcified over time. They knew I drove an old truck. They knew I worked with my hands. I do, I always have, I find it satisfying. They knew I lived in a modest house in a quiet neighborhood in Fredericksburg. What they didn't know, what no one outside of my accountant, my attorney, and a few longtime colleagues knew, was that I had been quietly acquiring commercial real estate in Northern Virginia for the better part of 30 years. Not flashy properties, not office towers, event venues, banquet halls, private dining spaces. 31 properties across Virginia, Maryland, and southern Pennsylvania. The kind of places people book for weddings, corporate galas, retirement parties, fundraiser dinners. I had started with one, a struggling reception hall outside Manassas that I bought in 1994 for $180,000 and turned into something beautiful. Eleanor had helped me pick out the light fixtures. We'd worked weekends refinishing the floors ourselves. By the time I sold that first property, 12 years later, I had 4 more. I never advertised, never put my name on anything flashy. The properties ran under an LLC umbrella, and a property management company handled day-to-day operations. I showed up when something needed fixing, because I like fixing things, and because it kept me humble about what the work actually involved. Serena had booked their rehearsal dinner at a place called the Heathwood Estate in Fairfax County. She had not known, and Owen had not thought to mention, that the Heathwood Estate was one of mine. I sat in the garage for a while after that phone call. Then I went inside and made myself a cup of coffee. I looked out the kitchen window at the maple tree Eleanor had planted the year Owen started kindergarten. The leaves were starting to turn. October light. Everything going quiet. I thought about calling Owen. I thought about what I would say, and I thought about what he would say, and I thought about how it would end with him apologizing on her behalf in that careful, exhausted way he'd been using for the last year whenever Serena's decisions created friction with anyone else. I didn't call Owen. I called my property manager instead. The rehearsal dinner was on a Saturday. I drove out to the Heathwood Estate on Thursday morning, not to cause trouble, just to see the place. I hadn't been out in a few months. They'd done a nice job with the fall arrangements out front, pumpkins on the steps, ornamental kale in the window boxes. One of my managers, a young woman named Teresa, saw me walking the property and came over looking nervous until she recognized me. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "I didn't know you were coming by." "Just looking," I said. "You got a big event Saturday?" She nodded. "Rehearsal dinner for a Whitmore Calderwood wedding. 40 guests. Full buyout of the South Room." Whitmore was Serena's last name. Calderwood was her mother's maiden name. They'd used both on the reservation. "Beautiful," I said. I meant the property. I meant the maple out front going orange at the edges. I meant all of it, actually. The beautiful absurdity of the whole situation. I asked Teresa to pour me a copy of the event contract when she had a chance. She did. On Saturday, I went. I want to be clear about something. I did not go to make a scene. I did not go dressed intentionally shabby, or to embarrass anyone, or to prove a point with my appearance. I wore what I would wear to any family occasion: a button-down shirt, clean slacks, a blazer my wife had bought me the Christmas before she got sick. I looked like a 63-year-old man going to his son's rehearsal dinner. That's what I was. I arrived about 20 minutes before the scheduled start. The South Room at Heathwood is beautiful. 12-foot ceilings, walnut paneling, big windows looking out onto the garden. I'd refinished those floors myself, actually, back in 2009, on the long weekend when the usual contractor had a family emergency. I remember being on my hands and knees in that room with a belt sander, thinking I was getting too old for this. The event coordinator at the door, a young man I hadn't met before, checked his clipboard and told me I wasn't on the guest list. "I'm Owen Calloway's father," I said. He looked uncomfortable. "Sir, I have specific instructions from the event organizer that this is a closed dinner for the listed guests only." "I understand," I said. "I just want to say hello to my son." "I'm sorry, sir, I can't let you in." I didn't push. I didn't make a fuss. I asked him to tell Owen I had stopped by. He said he would. I walked back out to the parking lot and sat in my truck for a few minutes. Here's the thing about sitting in a parking lot, you own, when someone has just told you that you're not welcome inside. The humor of it is genuinely strange. I'm not a man who gets angry quickly. Eleanor used to say I had a long fuse and a very large yield, and she wasn't wrong. But sitting there in that parking lot, looking at the building my money had restored, thinking about the envelope in my coat pocket with my dead wife's handwriting on it, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. Owen came out about 5 minutes later. He'd clearly been told I was there, and he walked toward my truck with that particular expression he's had since he was a teenager. Shoulders forward, eyes a little too careful. The look of a man managing 2 sets of expectations simultaneously. "Dad," he said. He stopped a few feet from the truck. "I didn't know you were coming. I was invited to a wedding," I said. "I thought I'd stop by to see you before things got busy." He rubbed the back of his neck. Serena wanted to keep the dinner small. Her family, the wedding party. "She called me last week," I said. "I know." He looked at the ground. "Dad, I'm sorry. I should have called you myself. I didn't handle that well." "No," I said, "you didn't." We sat with that for a moment. "Are you contributing the $300,000? I asked. "Is that still happening?" "Yes, Dad, of course, that hasn't changed." I nodded slowly. "Come to dinner this week," I said. Just us, before the wedding. He agreed. He hugged me briefly, the kind of hug a man gives when he's relieved the conversation is ending. He went back inside. I drove home. I called my attorney on Monday morning. I want to explain something about the money. $300,000 is real money. It's not nothing, not to anyone, but the figure Serena and her parents had actually been planning around. The figure I'd overheard discussed at a family dinner 3 months earlier, when they didn't realize I was in the next room, was considerably larger. Raymond had been operating on the assumption that my contribution would be matched by some kind of investment participation he'd been designing. He'd mentioned to Owen that the total wedding and reception budget was closer to $800,000 and that my contribution was expected to anchor it. I'd never agreed to that. Owen had never exactly corrected the assumption. The rehearsal dinner was Saturday. The wedding was the following Saturday. On Sunday, the day after the rehearsal dinner, I called Owen and told him I'd be pulling my contribution entirely. I explained it clearly and without drama. I told him the $300,000 was no longer available and that the reasons were personal and he knew what they were. I told him I loved him. I told him I loved him. I hoped he and Serena would build a good life, and I meant it. He went quiet for a long time. Then, Dad, the deposits. Raymond has already. That's between you and Raymond, I said gently. I'm sorry, son. On Monday morning, I also contacted my property management office and instructed them to review the Heathwood estate booking for the Whitmore-Calderwood wedding the following Saturday. The wedding had been booked under a corporate events contract. Not unusual, Raymond's firm had arranged it. The contract had a specific provision, standard in all my event venue agreements, that the booking party must disclose any relevant conflicts of interest with the property ownership. It's a clause my attorney drafted years ago after a complicated situation with a corporate client who'd had an undisclosed dispute with my LLC. Raymond's firm had a pending litigation matter, a zoning dispute in Loudoun County, that named one of my subsidiary LLCs as a co-respondent. He had known this when his assistant booked the venue. The clause had not been honored. My property manager sent the formal notice on Tuesday. The Heathwood estate booking for the Whitmore-Calderwood wedding on October 19th was cancelled. The deposit was forfeited per contract terms. I heard about what happened next through Owen, who called me 3 times on Tuesday and twice on Wednesday. Raymond had apparently been on the phone with his attorney within an hour of receiving the notice. But the clause was airtight. My attorney had made sure of that years ago, and the litigation matter was a matter of public record. There was nothing to contest. They scrambled for an alternative venue. This part I know only second-hand, but from what Owen told me, Raymond had connections, Serena had ideas, but finding a comparable space that could accommodate a wedding of that size on 6 days' notice in Northern Virginia in October, peak foliage season, every decent venue booked 18 months in advance, proved more difficult than anticipated. They found something eventually, smaller, different from what had been planned. I didn't follow it closely. I had other things to think about. The week of the wedding, Owen came to dinner, just the 2 of us, like I'd asked. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had been managing things for a long time and was beginning to feel the weight of it. We ate pot roast. I make it the way Eleanor used to, slow and low, with the vegetables soft and the gravy thick. Owen had 2 helpings and didn't say much for the first half of the meal. Then he said, "Did you know about Heathwood?" "Yes," I said. "When did you buy it?" 2006. He was quiet. "You never told me." "You never asked much about the properties," I said. "I figured you'd learn more about it eventually." He looked at his plate. "How many do you have?" 31, I said, "as of last spring." He set down his fork. "Dad." I refilled his water glass. "Your mother knew. She helped me pick out the light fixtures at the first one. You were probably 8 years old. You came with us to walk through it, and you fell asleep in the car on the way home and I carried you inside." He didn't say anything for a while. "I should have told Serena," he finally said. "Yes," I agreed. "She thought, I know what she thought," I said. "A lot of people make assumptions. It's not a character flaw. What matters is what we do when we find out the assumptions were wrong." He nodded, slowly. "He's not a bad man, my son. He's a man who got tangled up in someone else's idea of what success looks like. and he let it go on too long because he didn't want to lose her. I understand that. I was tangled up in things too at his age. "Are you going to the wedding?" he asked. "If I'm invited," I said. He called Serena that night from my driveway. I went inside to give him privacy, but I saw him through the kitchen window, standing by his car, one hand in his pocket, talking for a long time. Then he came back inside. "Saturday at 4 o'clock, he said. "She wants you to walk in with me." The wedding was smaller than planned, quieter. The venue they'd found was a restored farmhouse property about 40 minutes outside the city. Nothing like the grand estate Serena had originally envisioned, but honestly I thought it was more beautiful. String lights in the trees, a ceremony on the lawn as the sun went low and everything turned gold. I sat in the front row. When the music started and Owen walked out, he caught my eye and something in his face changed, loosened, like he'd been holding his breath for a month. Serena looked beautiful. I want to say that. Whatever had passed between us, she loved my son, and I could see it in how she watched him come toward her. Raymond stood on the other side of the aisle. We didn't speak before the ceremony, but at the reception, late in the evening, he found me at the bar. He was 2 drinks in, which for a man like Raymond means he was arriving at honesty. "I didn't know it was your property," he said. "I know you didn't," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "I owe you an apology." "You owe my son an apology," I said. "He's the one who spent the last 3 weeks managing the fallout." Raymond looked at his glass. He was a man who wasn't accustomed to being on the wrong side of a transaction, and he was processing it in real time. I almost felt for him. "Your son is a good man," he said. "He is," I agreed. "I'd appreciate it if the people closest to him acted like they know it." He nodded. He ordered another drink. We didn't become friends that night, but something shifted, something that had been locked, found, some give in it. I danced once, at the end of the evening, slow song. I danced alone near the edge of the floor, thinking about Eleanor, thinking about the envelope in my coat pocket. I'd put it back in there that morning without entirely knowing why. $4,800 and her handwriting, for Owen's wedding. He was married now. She would have loved the string lights. She would have loved how Owen laughed at the best man's speech, that full-body laugh he's had since he was a kid. She would have been proud of him. I stayed until the end. I helped fold up chairs because that's what I do. I can't stand still when something needs doing. Teresa, my property manager who'd been at Heathwood last week, would have laughed if she'd seen me. The man who owns 31 event properties, folding chairs at his son's wedding in a borrowed farmhouse. But the chairs needed folding, and it was a good night, and it was a good night, and my son was happy. That's the whole story, really. Not the money, not the properties, not the cancelled booking or the contract clause, or Raymond's expression when things didn't go the way he planned. Those are just the facts of what happened. The story is this. There was a night in October when my son looked across a lawn full of string lights and saw me sitting there, and something in him relaxed. And later, he walked over to where I was standing by myself with a glass of wine, and he put his arm around me and he said, "I'm glad you're here, Dad. I'm 63 years old. I've buried the person I loved most in this world. I've built something quietly and without fanfare over 30 years of early mornings and long weekends and decisions that didn't always make sense to people who couldn't see what I was building toward. I can tell you that the look on Raymond's face when he understood the situation was satisfying in the way that things are satisfying when someone finally sees you clearly for the first time. But it was not the thing I drove home thinking about. I drove home thinking about the maple tree in my backyard. Thinking about how Eleanor planted it the year Owen started school, how it's taller than the house now, how in October it goes the most extraordinary red. I drove home thinking about how much she would have loved today. That's enough. That's more than enough. I've been thinking about what actually happened that October, and the more I turn it over, the more I see it clearly for what it was. Serena didn't make a mistake because she was cruel. She made a mistake because she looked at me and saw only what was on the surface, an old truck, worn hands, a quiet house, and she let that picture become the whole truth. That's a very human thing to do. We're all guilty of it at some point. We decide we know someone before we've done the actual work of knowing them. The problem isn't the assumption. The problem is what you build on top of it and how far you let it carry you before you stop and ask whether it's solid. She built a wedding on top of it. Raymond built a financial strategy on top of it. And Owen, my own son, let them both keep building without saying a word to correct the foundation. That last part is the one I've sat with the longest. Owen knew who I was. Not every detail, maybe, but enough. He knew I wasn't struggling. He knew the properties existed. And somewhere along the way, he made a quiet decision not to correct the picture, because correcting it would have complicated things with the people he was trying to impress. I understand that choice. I don't excuse it, but I understand it. The desire to belong somewhere, to be accepted by people whose acceptance feels like it means something, is about as old and human as anything gets. But here's what I've learned, and I mean learned the hard way, over 63 years of watching people and watching myself. You cannot build a real life on a version of yourself that you've edited for someone else's approval. It always comes apart, not always dramatically, not always publicly, but it comes apart. The gap between who you pretend to be and who you actually are, that gap has weight, and over time, it gets heavy. What Raymond experienced wasn't bad luck. It was a natural consequence of building a structure on incomplete information that he chose not to verify because verifying it might have inconvenienced him. That's not punishment. That's just how things work. What you construct without care, without honesty, without taking the time to understand the full reality of a situation, it doesn't hold. Sooner or later, the actual ground shows through. And what changed for Owen was not that he got everything he wanted. He didn't. The wedding was smaller, more scrambled, not what anyone had planned. What changed was that he stopped managing two versions of himself and just stood in one place. I saw it happen in real time, that night in my driveway when he called Serena and told her I was coming on Saturday. He looked exhausted and then he looked lighter. That's what honesty does. It's not comfortable, but it's load-bearing in a way that pretending never is. I think about Eleanor a lot when I think about all of this. She was the most honest person I've ever known. Not brutal about it, but clean. She never let things fester. She'd say the hard thing early, quietly, with care, and move on. She used to tell Owen when he was young, "The truth is just easier in the long run, baby. Lies need maintenance." He was maybe 12 when she said that. I don't know if he remembered it, but I hope, standing in that farmhouse with string lights in the trees and his father in the front row, something in him came back to it. The maple she planted is taller than the roof now. I look at it every morning when I drink my coffee. It doesn't know anything about weddings or real estate or what people assume when they see an old truck in the driveway. It just grew steadily, the way things do when they're planted right and tended honestly. That's the whole lesson as far as I can tell. Grow straight, tend what matters. Let people find out who you are in their own time. And when they do, make sure what they find was worth the wait.